Hello, everyone. I'm Rashad Robinson, president of Color of Change, and I'm so thrilled to be with you all for this launch of the Pedestal project by Color of Change. This is the first day of Black History Month, and we're using this as an opportunity to launch the Pedestal project, an augmented reality experience that allows users to place virtual statues of 3 racial justice leaders where symbols of racism once stood. Thanks to the movement for racial justice, we have removed so many Confederate monuments and other monuments to racism, but what have we replaced them with? How can we create symbols that inspire people to fight for justice in the next decade and beyond? As an organization dedicated to driving systemic change for racial justice, to create a more human and less hostile world for Black people in America and all people, Color of Change has always understood the role monuments play in slowing down the progress. Ever since 2017, when white nationalists marched through Charlottesville communities and the University of Virginia campus, rallying around statues celebrating the Confederacy and carrying torches invoking the history of violent racial terrorism. We have been part of the national movement to remove statues and rename buildings that continue to normalize racism as an acceptable part of history. Let's be clear. Confederate statues are symbols of white supremacy. They were erected for a reason, mostly long after the Civil War. Firstly, to draw a line that said, progress will not happen here, and we will not participate in change. And we aim to dominate everyone else in this country. And secondly, to issue a warning to Black people, to put us in our place and keep the threat of violence ever present. Many were up in front of courthouses where people are supposed to go to get justice, placed on hallowed ground where laws and decisions are made about this country's future and who's valued and who isn't. And that mentality has affected local culture, national culture, slowing down the pace of change and even reversing it in many places. The effort to defend and institutionalize white supremacy sped into our country at both the societal and policy levels. It is seeped in so many ways. In our time, Confederate statues continue to encourage white nationalists who are hell-bent on resisting progress. We need to tell the story of justice instead of encouraging all those who believe, and instead encourage all those who believe in progress and racial equity. The Pedestal project is a continuation of this work to take down Confederate symbols and to, just as importantly, replace them with symbols of a just America. By using virtual technology to replace these statues with people, events, and ideas that move our country forward instead of taking us backwards, we can turn these pedestals into a celebration of progress. Since the Charleston church shooting in 2015, our movement has forced the removal of 125 Confederate symbols in public spaces. Since May 2020, after George Floyd was murdered, and activists successfully organized unprecedented Black Lives Matter protests in cities across the country, at least 59 Confederate symbols have been removed from public spaces. And while this is progress, currently there are still nearly 1,800 Confederate symbols and monuments in public spaces across the country. But it's not enough. It's not enough to remove these statues. We must also place them with symbols of not only a whole new set of values, but symbols about what it takes to fight for those values and win. Every statue we change must go hand in hand with a statue we change. The laws that we change. We must show the connection between activism and real change. Symbols like monuments should never be a consolation prize. They must accompany real efforts to change laws and outcomes for real people. As we continue to confront America's long history of racism, the removal and replacement of these monuments is just one of the many steps we need to move our country forward towards more actionable racial justice, to make racial justice real. So the Pedestal Project uses technology to help us see a world where statues of racial justice inspire people to keep thinking about the changes we need to make and to actually get involved in making them. We need to see people who stand for deep principles of justice and also know how to fight for it. So we're focusing on 3 of many heroes fighting for concrete anti-racist policy changes that will transform our country and have transformed our country for the better. Leaders like Alicia Garza, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter and the principal of the Black Futures Lab. Leaders like Chelsea Miller, founder of Freedom March New York City, and the late Congressman and civil rights leader, John Lewis. So we are so excited. And now we're just gonna present this video that's gonna tell you a little bit more about the project and the movement behind it.
Symbols of racism have been torn down all across America, leaving behind empty pedestals in their wake. It's time for new symbols to take their place. Introducing the Pedestal Project, an augmented reality experience that lets you place statues of racial justice leaders where symbols of racism once stood. Visit Color of Change on Instagram. Select from a gallery of statues, place them atop an empty pedestal, and then hear in their own voice why change is worth fighting for.
We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now.
We will ensure that this revolution will be televised.
There would be no America if there were not Black women.
Join us in the fight for racial justice. Visit Color of Change on Instagram.
All right. So I am so excited to introduce Spencer Evans, the sculptor who worked to help recreate the real-life designs of the activists, to speak on his process, the concepts behind creating these sculptures, the Black brilliance behind it. Take us away, Spencer, and congratulations and thank you for your work.
Thank you, Rashad. I appreciate that. Good evening, everybody. It's good to be here. It's good to see you. Happy Black History Month to everyone. I want to thank all my family and friends who are here in attendance. I see all of you and I love all of you. To get into my mindset behind this and all of the collaborative work that came through, something was really important. So after we had clearance about who we were going to sculpt, it's important for me to capture the spirit of each person in a specific moment. Depicting the psyche of a person is one of my favorite challenges to chase. I watched a bunch of speeches and panels of Chelsea Miller, Alicia Garza, and Congressman John Lewis to get a bit of a grasp of their psyches and mannerisms. Next, I made a series of sketches that I bounced back and forth between the creative team at BBDO NYC and through Color of Change, I had the pleasure of actually meeting with Alicia Garza and Chelsea Miller a couple times and hearing from them about ways to make the sculpture more authentically them. We also met with Congressman Lewis's team and got valuable feedback from them as well. After this, I was given creative freedom to depict them in a way that went deeper than just their physical likeness. One of my favorite parts of this project was getting into the details of each of them. Details about subtlety. This is the reason I'm a firm believer in Black statues being sculpted by Black sculptors. This subtlety is in visually knowing the difference between anger and pain, the difference between what is dismissed as an attitude and knowing that it's a look of purpose. This also plays into the choice of depicting Congressman Lewis when he was in his 20s. He did amazing things in his later in his life. However, it's important to think about the courage he showed at a very young age, when the only people that were in his corner were Black folks, before he was accepted by the white gaze of respectability. We have to think about how he was only 25 when he and many others walked across that bridge in Selma on Bloody Sunday and literally came face to face with the violence of this country. This is something, Congressman, this is something I felt needed to be portrayed, particularly within the youth of Congressman Lewis, because it resonates with so many other Black Americans who have had to come face to face with state-approved violence within 25 years of being on this earth, myself included. This also speaks to youth and how important that is in the imagery of monumentalism. This does away with the idea that one would have to be a particular age to make a change. If we pay attention to history, a lot of the times when things were shifted, there were young folks right there on the front lines. And so it's important for young folks to grow up seeing monuments that look like them. Regarding Alicia Garza and Chelsea Miller, something was in the front of my mind the entire time. Black women and folks assigned female at birth have historically been given hardship, attached with unrealistic expectations, and produced brilliant delicacy time after time, and still continue to do amazing things despite being met with hatred or indifference after doing them. So it was important to listen to them while attempting to portray their image. Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors founded a movement that reached every corner of this world, a movement that was and still is attacked by a large percentage of this nation. It was important to depict the strength it takes to carry 1/3 of that cumbersome task as gracefully as Alicia Garza does. The detail within Chelsea's sculpture lies in a couple things. She's been described as a still waters runs deep type of person. Her spirit transcends physical stature, and that needs to come across in her facial expression as well as her body language. Lastly, Chelsea spoke about the specificity and how she wanted to be dressed in the statue. She explained how activism doesn't have to look a certain way, and it's important for young folks to grow up seeing diverse imagery that spans and stands the test of time. So lastly, when it comes to working with Happy Finish on a project like this, seeing the sketches translated from sketch into a 3D sculpture, it was a beautiful experience working with artists and designers of many talents to work towards the same goal. The folks at Happy Finish were really gracious and patient with the creative team and I, as I was being nitpicky about a lot of the things, from the patterns on the clothes all the way to making sure that they laid Alicia's and Chelsea's edges on those sculptures. I have sisters, cousins, and a niece who probably would have something to say if I didn't make sure that happened. My mind was blown when we began to have screen share sessions where I was able to see and make suggestions and watch the designers render things in real time. And then seeing the end result is surreal. Black monumentalism will be a part of the future that pushes culture in a direction that speaks to the truth of our nation and makes all of us better. I'm blessed to have been a part of an amazing project with amazing folks. And I'm happy to see what's going to happen in our future. I think we're headed in the right direction, but we all have to keep working. Thank you.
Thank you, Spencer. I feel better off for having heard that. Black monumentalism in the future. Like, there was just so much there. Thank you for sharing the background of your work, the care and the love that you brought to this project, and the focus and the importance of Black storytellers, Black artists, Black creatives being able to shape our images. So incredibly important. Thank you for this work. And now I want to turn it over to one of our first monuments, one of our first people who is being celebrated through this project. Chelsea Miller is one of the featured racial justice leaders in the Pedestal Project. Chelsea is the co-founder of Freedom March New York City, a nationally recognized movement and advocacy organization that leads nonviolent protests. Freedom March New York City also provides training to help organize the New York City de-escalate situations that may occur on the front lines and equip them with the resources to push for policy change. Chelsea, thank you for joining us today. And I'd love it if you can take it away, share a little bit about what this means to you, your involvement in this project, and the importance of projects, symbols, storytelling. Anything you want to say, sister, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Color of Change. Thank you to Rashad Robinson. Thank you to the families of the movement who have created so much space for all of the work that has transpired over these past few months. When we think about after the George Floyd protests, but even before that, when we talk about the work of undoing a history of racism within this country that spans over 400 years, and the reckoning that ultimately must take place as we see these images of racism and historical figures that ultimately deemed Black folks as less than, as 3/5, and not human. So when I think of this idea of taking away images and replacing them anew, I think about stepping into new chapters for our young people to understand what power looks like, and that power will always be within the people, understanding the importance of standing on the right side of history. I'm a comparative politics buff, so I also think about the importance of understanding parallels and realizing that in Germany, you will not see a statue of Hitler. So why is it that we have Confederate statues that ultimately were leaders who were proponents of genocide? Because that is exactly what took place within our country. And it is time for us to understand and unpack that. And so as a young Black woman on the front lines, it was important that when Color of Change approached me to be a part of this project, that I was able to really show what it means to be an activist and organizer, and to not fit into a box of what that looks like, and also reckon with the fact that Black women have always been a part of movements. Black women have always carried movements. The difference is whether or not we have been recognized for that work. When we talk about Shirley Chisholm, when we talk about Ida B. Wells, when we talk about all of the incredible women who have come before in doing this work. And so it is an absolute honor to be able to be a part of the Pedestal Project and to have my monument digitally brought out into the world. I was 23 years old when I spoke at the March on Washington, which was the same age as John Lewis in 1963. And when we lost John Lewis this past summer, that was extremely difficult for the movement. When you start to realize that the baton is being passed and not knowing whether or not we are fully ready for this next chapter. But one of the things that I said at the March on Washington, and I will always say, is that when we are tired, we rest on the shoulders of giants. And so to me, that gives me so much hope for the future. I do this for the younger people that'll come after me. I'm 24, but there are younger folks that are coming up, and it's so important to make sure that we leave this world a lot better than how we were given it. So thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. I so appreciate that. Appreciate your words. Appreciate you not just talking about the future, but helping us wrestle with all the ways in which hopefully the future will be different by different choices we make about who we lift up, ensuring we have a future that shows our leaders with a more full picture of the range of leadership. So great to have you here. Thank you for your words. And I'm here to introduce Mr. Grant Lewis. Mr. Grant Lewis is the brother of the late US Congressman John Lewis. Mr. Lewis, I can't express the gratitude I share for the work and service of Congressman Lewis. And nobody does their work alone. We are supported by communities of family and loved ones and support that have uplift us, that encourage us, that give us advice. And him having a network of family that was by his side, I know was so encouraging to him. Congressman Lewis's book is one of my favorite books about the civil rights movement because it gives so many clear sort of pieces and nuggets of advice about the work that went in, but also the strategy about seeing yourself part of a movement long term. During Congressman Lewis's life, he contributed so much to so many. The list of both policy, practice change, and culture change that he was behind, we could have a whole several Zooms just talking about that. But I'd love it if you could share a little bit about what this means to you and your family, what you thought it might have meant to Congressman Lewis, who I got to talk to about technology often, and he was a big proponent of making sure that technology had civil rights protections to it, and worked with us on those things. And so I'd love it if you could just share a little bit about the legacy, about what this means, and in this project in particular.
Thank you so much, Rashad. And thank you, Color of Change, for having me on your panel. I would like to commend your organization for the work you do towards racial injustice and racial inequality that we face as African Americans. Also stressing the fact that as African Americans, we have come so far, but we have so much work to be done. Your work towards justice, voting rights, equal rights means so much to the African American community. And, you know, during my brother's life, he faced so many challenges, faced a lot of challenges, but he was also up to the task. He was the kind of person that it wasn't about him. It wasn't about him. It was about what he could do to make the world a better place to live, not for just African Americans, but for people in general. His legacy will always be special to our family because it started right here on a farm in Troy, Alabama. And, you know, he met a man named Martin Luther King, and that propelled him to get in trouble. And he got in a lot of trouble. But as you know, he was arrested more than 40 times. And looking at the reasons he was arrested have helped African Americans make a lot of strides. And you know, his longevity, he worked an entire lifetime towards equal rights. His pet peeve was voting rights. I mean, I remember when I was a little boy, I remember him coming through the South, encouraging people to get out and vote that had never voted before. And that was important. And a lot of people didn't do it because they never heard that kind of thing before. But his life played a big role in the success that we've enjoyed today. And his legacy, to me, is his love for family, his love for his fellow man. He was so struck about not worrying about what's going to happen to him. He had a higher calling. It was so much more than that. And he would be so proud of the Color of Change right now because you all are making such a big difference in taking down these statues of white supremacists that represented hate instead of love, that represented inequality over equality. He would be thrilled about that. And the congressman was totally against hate, all about love, all about understanding, all about what he could do for the next person. And his legacy, to me, will live on for years to come. As you well know, from start to the very end, he was still telling us what we should do. So to me, his whole life was spent helping other people. Well,
thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you here, for for you to share those words and bring us into, the legacy of Congressman Lewis, someone whose work inspired so many and continues to be a North Star about the type of commitment we need to have. I love that Congressman Lewis always told us to get into good trouble. And he did that throughout his life. I know that Chelsea, through her work, is continuing to build. I know the disruptive art and the ways in which Spencer is engaging through his artwork is making good trouble. And this next honoree, who really represents so much of what's happening now, my dear sister, is Alicia Garza, principal of the Black Futures Lab, author of The Purpose of Power, and the co-creator of hashtag Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter Network. And I'd love if we can hear a little bit now from Alicia Garza.
Hi, my name is Alicia Garza. I'm the principal at the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund, the co-creator of Black Lives Matter, and a proud board member at Color of Change. I'm so honored to be a part of the Pedestal Project, an immersive experience to reimagine what a world centered on racial justice not only feels like, not only looks like, but is like. You know, when we talk about who we put up on pedestals, in cities across America, we have elevated the failed leaders of the Confederate movement, people who were committed to ensuring that we would never achieve racial justice in this country. But with the Pedestal Project, we get to knock down those symbols of hatred, of division, of unclarity about whose lives matter. And instead, we get to replace on those pedestals visions of people who we know have spent their entire lives working to make sure that racial justice is real. I'm so proud to be a partner in this project with Color of Change, and I'm honored that I would be one of 3 people selected to be on one of those pedestals as a symbol of what racial justice can look like in this country. You know, in my book, The Purpose of Power, How We Come Together When We Fall Apart, I talk about how we have to be mindful of what we do with pedestals, who we place on pedestals. And ultimately, I feel agnostic about myself being on a pedestal, but I feel honored that my community would say that I deserve to be recognized for my work. Bigger than that, I feel honored to know that my community sees me as a symbol of what it looks like when racial justice is real. Thank you so much for including me. This is an amazing, brilliant project. And again, I am humbled to be a small part of it.
Well, all right. You know, we've gotten a chance to learn a little bit more about this project tonight. So I want to thank you all for joining us for the launch of the Pedestal Project. I want to thank Spencer Evans, the sculptor of this project, for his great work, the importance of Black creatives, Black artists, the sort of brilliant face of storytelling that comes from Black talent. I want to thank our racial justice leaders, Alicia Garza, Chelsea Miller, and Grant Lewis, representing the late U.S. Congressman John Lewis. I want to end the night by encouraging everyone to join together to help build power for racial justice. Let's replace symbols of hate and racism with the statues of 3 of the many leaders who are deserving to be standing on these pedestals as monuments of the struggle for justice in this country. And let us recognize that part of replacing these statues is the road ahead towards passing the statues, passing the policies, advancing the practices that help drive forward. The connection between the presence and visibility of symbols to the power to change the rules cannot be underestimated. Visit Color of Change on Instagram and use the AR lens to place statues of the 3 racial justice leaders on top of empty pedestals where symbols of racism once stood. And join Color of Change to take action. Go to our website, colorofchange.org, to sign the petition. Take them all down. Remove and replace every Confederate symbol in America. This is the call to action. This is the way of how we translate this aspiration, this energy into the change that we want to see. And happy Black History Month. As my sister Alicia Garza, as so many folks in the movement has said, let us also not just think about Black history, but Black future and the future and the road ahead. Thank you for joining us until justice is real.